Top of the AM, young goats. What's going on? How y'all feeling? So I'm gonna talk about. I labeled this format already. So like, dude, I just got off of work. I just got off of a 13-hour shift. It's kind of crazy. So this is like a format of half boards and what ifs. This is the probably the highest hand trap count that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I'm not even kidding, bro. I remember I used to play side frames with like card D, and not that I was playing a lot of hand traps then. Dude, this format is freaking gnarly, like in like the worst way. It's so crazy. It's not a bad format by any means. I just feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is always like regressing. It'll like progress so well, and then the standard gets changed and the bar gets set so high that like power creeping just happens so like frequently. And then on top of that, like you have this constant like regression of just going right back to having to play so many hand traps. You go from, oh, we can play board breakers, to, oh, we have to play hand traps again because we can't like let any of these decks combo. And I'm thinking about like Fiendsmith, Fiendsmith dot decks, right? Snake Eyes, Fiendsmith U-Bell, Mermail. That deck's freaking crazy and scary. I'm thinking about decks like Memento, and now Ryziel and Malice. I mean, dude, Tenpai. There's quite a few, the Fire King variants, there's quite a few, honestly, like crazy decks that it feels like if the deck's engine goes like unimpeded, that the board should be just completely unbreakable. Not in the sense that like it's literally impossible, just that like if you are breaking it 10 times out of 10, you're like not OTKing and you're probably not going to beat their follow-up and you're not going to be able to grind with them. Like it will require your entire hand or like pretty much all of it if you're even able to play into these boards. I've never seen a hand trap count this high. Like exceeding 15 is one thing. Like I've seen like 18, but like 20 plus where more than half your deck is hand traps is kind of crazy. I don't think, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh's dead. Oh, like, you know, we just need to quit playing the game. Oh, I need a break. Oh, I'm going to like sell all my cards, you know, and I'm totally done. But it is like a format of like literally like half boards and what ifs and overpromised and underdelivered, you know? And it's making people adapt in the sense that they're playing decks that can end on a board no matter how many hand interactions you have. So, like, for example, Ryziel being able to end on Detonator no matter what is so valuable that that deck is such a strong choice, even though its ceiling is not as high. Objectively, honestly, its ceiling really isn't high at all. I feel like a few pops and, like, you know, a cross is really crazy, especially, like, plugging in into, like, a thruster into a Bagusko in your turn, potentially. I mean, the field spell does have, like, some restrictions where, like, you can't go, like, double Detonator, right? Because that'd be freaking crazy to have to summoning one on your opponent's turn. But I feel like its ceiling is objectively low in comparison to like resolving one Snake Eye Ash, right? Resolving one Samsara Lotus, resolving like a Neptibus, you know what I mean? Like these are all like insane one card combos that like can literally end the game on the spot if they go uncontested, unchecked. Ryziel can like combo and you cannot hand trap them, and I feel very safe. If this format was 100% Ryziel, I would feel so safe and so comfortable with my main deck choices, knowing that I'd probably be on more of like a mid-range approach with a combination of board breakers and like the hand traps that matter, the ones that just provide coverage. I wouldn't be like doubling down on like crazy stuff like Ogre and Mourner and like awkward hand traps. I'd probably like keep my standard Ash, Emperor, probably some Full Houses, you know, Nib if it's still going to be that good. I feel like hand interactions are valuable, and like while we could say, oh bro, like this is crazy, man, that's way too many hand traps, like the game is dead, it's toxic, like Yu-Gi-Oh is at an all-time like state of degeneracy, like there's no way anybody's gonna be able to play Yu-Gi-Oh. Look at the other end of the spectrum, right? Like if you don't have a hand trap, what happens to you, right? So would I be mad if I get hand trapped and blown out the water? Like, nah, because if they had to hand trap me that many times, I was probably doing something bad to them, bro. They probably weren't gonna like me anyways, you know. Whatever I was ending on, dude, they didn't have enough cards to break through it. I do think that it's a nice concession to make this format to make an objective choice from the standpoint of I know how many hand interactions that I might have to play through. So should I play a deck that is able to be resilient enough to end on a half board through any amount of hand traps that they could possibly throw at me, and to also have room to play an abundant amount of hand traps myself, Am I going to play a big combo deck and get blown out the water if I don't draw like crazy every single opening hand? Should I play Fiendsmith Kashtira? Should I play Rizio? I mean, in my opinion, I think that Rizio and Fiendsmith Cash and Unchained, just my personal opinion, and Memento, I think specifically these four decks actually have like the craziest ceiling in the terms of resiliency and playing through hand interactions. I think that Memento, Unchained, and like pretty much any Fiendsmith deck, but I want to say like Fiendsmith Kashtira and Rizio, like can play through the most hand traps and end on like a board that's enough to take the rest of the cards out of your opponent's hand. So it's kind of crazy. So I feel like those are choices that like concessions that you might make. You might say, this isn't the funnest deck. I don't like this deck. This isn't my favorite deck. But I know right now that my opponent has, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's really like that. It's really like that. So I know that my opponent has literally more hand traps than I could probably count. And if I'm playing a deck that can play through 1 to 2 on average, then I'm probably not going to do so well, because the offset chance that my opponent just happens to open more than 2 and I can't play means, yeah, I can crutch on mine, but like, don't I want to play a deck that can secure follow-up minimum and a decent amount of interaction through the number of hand traps my opponent has? So it feels like the format that we're in is really good in the sense that like it feels so mid-range, and I love mid-rangey control decks, and grind games are happening more frequently because like full combos are just not resolving. And so what I want to say to add to that is that you should definitely capitalize on your resolutions. I think that every time a card resolves, that's a check in the box, right? And so, of course, like in the terms of sequencing, if you're a good player, and I mean, there's a bunch of GOATs that like people just don't know about, right? If you're a good player, I feel like when you're going through the checkbox, you can just kind of make the necessary concessions that like if this resolved, then he doesn't have it. If you're going through the checkbox of like Ash, Imperm, Veiler, Mourner, Droll, Ogre, the obscure weird ones, playing into Nib, cards like that. It's the premise of identifying what you lose to the most and playing around that. Sure, if I play around Nib, I play harder in the Ogre, right? If I play around Ogre, I play harder in the Nib sometimes. If I play around Droll, I play harder in the Ash. But the concession you make is, which one do I lose to harder? Like, which one can I play through? If I play harder into Ogre by playing around Nib and I still in on a half board, as opposed to not respecting Nib and playing around the card that I can play through in the first place, right? It seems redundant. It seems like it wouldn't make sense, but not a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players actually make sense with what they're doing, bro. They're literally crazy. So capitalizing on your resolutions is like super important. Like if I summon a unicorn and that card resolves, brother, that's a pretty big deal. And now it's always going to be, how far should I take it? Because a card like Nibiru is one thing, but then the territory of other hand traps is another, because a smart player is going to hold them for your choke points. And so these little nuances of certain cards that are stepping points, but not necessarily the combo extension or like the choke point. If this is just like a ladder I'm climbing on the way to the card that my opponent actually wants to interact with, sometimes I might actually activate that card. Sometimes when I'm playing into my opponent's boards, I summon Requiem and I say, what if he has Ash? I think I'm going to take my Requiem plus my Nib that I used against him, and I'm just going to make SP. And I'm going to clear his field and end on an interruption guaranteed no matter what, as opposed to eating that Ash, right? And especially if you didn't have Lacrima in rotation, that's just like one example of many. The fact that like I can commit into the Ash if I have the Lacrima, but let's say I didn't, right? And I just activated Requiem and they have the Ash, and I think to myself, well, what am I ending on? I won't have follow-up. I won't have a body floating. The best I got is like Typhon Pass. Or I can not play into the Ash at all, take the Requiem plus the Nib, right? And just make an SP. Clear my opponent's field, clock them a little bit, have an SP floating around, and I can do what I need to do next turn, you know what I mean? Like feeling more secure. So things like that are very vital, and I like this format because the better player is more likely to come out on top now, because it's less of a kind of like an RNG factor in like who goes first, right? Because going first is not as big of a deal because there's the lower likelihood of any full combo happening at all. Just be grateful if you're ending on anything, in my opinion. So that's kind of how I feel about this format. I'm still playing Memento. That's like literally my favorite deck right now. I love it so much. I think that that's absolutely insane. I have a crazy list for this format. I really hope that like I'm just playing Rizio all day. Honestly, like my list is just crazy against that matchup. It's literally like an FTK. I enjoy the deck a lot. I think that the choice that people are making is from that standpoint of resiliency and to be able to contend multiple interruptions and always end on something while having a ton of space for non-engine, and of course having the consistency factor and not playing into the territory of certain cards. Like there's certain hand traps that people are playing that like certain archetype specific like cards and matchups just aren't going to struggle with that. Like playing Malice, knowing that you're not going to struggle against Ashe and Droll as much, but playing, you're going to struggle maybe more into Nibiru. Playing Ryziel, understanding that your little bodies before you get into your XYZs are less likely to be interacted with, which allows you to do like some cheeky Dugaris plays before you even like. It's basically like when you play Branded and your opponent has Ashe and they know they want to Ashe Fusion, you activate 20 different card effects that can be Ashed and they won't Ashe it, right? Because they want to save Ashe for the Fusion. It's like when you play against Ryziel, you know a lot of your cards are going to resolve because they want to interact with Duo Drive. And so things like that are just like a very strong, I want to say, influence on why you might want to play that deck, because every deck has like this little small nuanced strength that other decks don't have. With Ryziel, your main deck cards are highly likely to resolve a majority of the time. So sometimes you can Baguska pass and not even make the dual drive and not even, you know what I mean? Like there's just so many nuance to it. And with Malice, like not really playing into Ashe for Droll as much and not caring about Shifter and Bestials, whereas like a Fiendsmith deck kind of does care about Ashe and it does care about Shifter and it does care about Bestials. There's so many concessions that you have to make, but I think that if you just from a generic standpoint can identify the vast majority of what you could struggle with, and if the choice that you're making is going to struggle less with the larger card pool, and is more likely to struggle with more nuanced cards, like maybe your deck, my deck, I feel like only struggles with Shifter and like DDG. Like every like Fualos, Memento is really strong in Fualos and Perilia. It's really, I have strong lines into Droll. I play through low impacts like crazy. I can play through Nib like nobody's business. But if I get Shifted, I'm gonna be summoning like my 3k body if I'm lucky, and if not, I'm just getting like literally a Fracture Dance and a Horn Dragon. So like 2-3 pops through a Shifter, which is not the worst, but it's definitely nothing compared to what I could do. And so if you're playing a deck and the only thing that you're struggling with is Shifter, I feel like that's a very, very influential like choice, right? Like, dang, I kind of feel like if the only card that stops me is Shifter, then I'd rather play this deck, honestly, than play the deck that struggles against everything else, right? And with Ryziel, it doesn't really care about Shifter, it doesn't really care about Lancia, it doesn't really care too much about Droll, and it kind of doesn't really care about a lot of hand traps, to be honest. Sure, we can say D-Berry is one thing, and like people are playing Crossout, but I think that's why so many people are playing that deck. And it's kind of a similar aspect of why I think a lot of people chose Tempai. It's very simple, it's easy to play, it's hard to throw with, it has a lot of room for non-engine. And the way Tempai interacts is like so many hand traps just don't work against that deck. Like Nib just doesn't work, Mourner sucks, Ogre sucks, Veiler barely ever even gets to be used, Impermanences get dodged through the wazoo. I mean, that deck really doesn't care about a lot of hand traps, right? And then the field spell just makes it just even crazier. And so, I feel like, yeah, all of these things are very important. I just want to share my thoughts with you guys on the format and where my head is at right now. And honestly, I can see and understand the choices that everyone's making. And if you didn't take anything else, take the little bits of like advice that I had in the middle of the video. And definitely just like take a step back and observe all of the interaction and the choice that you make. I always say play what you love and play what's fun. But if you just want to have the highest chance of winning, then honestly, this is the kind of format where the choice that you make is going to be from the standpoint of what it's able to play through and how frequently it can. So resiliency is key, and obviously consistency is always going to be like the two most influential factors from a deck choice perspective. And obviously the composition of your deck is just predicated to the format. And if your deck is struggling with a bunch of weird cards, like let's say your deck struggles against Droll, but it could beat every other hand trap, I feel like Droll's not enough to make me say, no, I don't want to play that deck. If my deck only loses to Shifter, I'd rather my deck only lose to Shifter, my deck struggle against Ogre and Ashe and Nib and be super weak into like both the Mocharmies, right? Because I feel like if my deck could play through all of that and the obscure Shifter is the only thing I have to worry about, it's so much easier to have preparation, right? And preparatory work to kind of like necessitate all of the mitigation that you could provide for that, just that one blowout that your deck loses to. So if like the only thing you have to worry about is crossouts for a Shifter, you know, if that's the only card you have to prepare for, then I feel like that's a great choice to make if your deck only struggles with that one card. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. God bless you guys. Deuces.